Hello everybody, and welcome. So I'm going to read the Nutcracker by E.T.A Hoffmann. The next chapter is chapter 8, and this is the story of the hard nut continued. You know now, children, commenced Councillor Drosselmeyer, on the following evening, why the Queen took such care in guarding the beautiful Princess Purlipap. Was it not to be feared that Lady Mouserings would execute her threat, that she would come again and bite the little princess to death? Drosselmeyer's machines were not the least protection against the wise and prudent Lady Mouserings, but the court astronomer, who was at the same time private stargazer and fortunate teller to His Majesty, declared it to be his opinion that the family of Baron Purr would be able to keep Lady Mouserings from the cradle. Most of that name were secretaries of legation at court with little to do, though always at hand for an embassy to a foreign power, but they must now render themselves useful at home. And thus it came that each of the waiting women must hold a son of their family upon her lap, and by continual and attentive fondling lighten the severe public duties which fell to their lot. Late one night, the two chief nurses, who sat close by the cradle, started up out of a deep sleep. All around lay in quiet slumber, no purring, the stillness of the grave. Even the death watch could be heard ticking. And what was the terror of the two chief waiting women, as they just saw before them a large, dreadful mouse, which stood erect upon its hind feet, and had laid its ugly head close against the face of the princess. With a cry of terror they jumped up, all awoke, but in a moment Lady Mouserings, for the great mouse by Purlipap's cradle, was no one but she, ran as fast as she could to the corner of the chamber. The secretaries of legation leaped after her, but too late. She had disappeared through a hole in the chamber floor. Little Purlipap woke at the noise and wept bitterly. "Thank heaven," cried the nurse. She lives. But how great was their terror when they looked at Purlipap and saw what a change had taken place in the sweet, beautiful child. This is what it now looks like. Instead of the white and red face with golden locks and large, ill-shaped head sat upon her thin, shriveled body, her azure blue eyes were changed into green, staring ones, and her little mouth had stretched itself from ear to ear. The Queen was brought to death's door by grief and sorrow, and it was found necessary to hang the king's library with thick wooded tapestry, for again and again he ran his head against the wall, crying out at every time in lamentable tones, "Ah me, unhappy monarch!" He might now have seen how much better it would have been to eat his sausages without fat, and to leave Lady Mouserings and her family at peace under their hearth. But Purlipap's royal father did not think about this. He laid all the blame upon the court watchmaker and mechanist Christian Elias Drosselmeyer of Nuremberg. He therefore wisely decreed that Drosselmeyer should restore the Princess Purlipap to her former condition within 4 weeks, or at least find out some certain and infallible method of effecting this. Otherwise, he should suffer a shameful death under the axe of the executioner. Drosselmeyer was not a little terrified, but he had great confidence in his skill and good fortune, and began immediately the first operation, which he thought useful. He took little Princess Pirlipat apart with great dexterity, unscrewed her little hands and feet, and carefully examined her inward structure. But he found at last that the princess would grow uglier as she grew bigger, and knew not what to do or what to advise. He put the princess carefully together again and sank down by her cradle in despair, for he was not allowed to leave it. The 4th week had commenced, yes, Thursday had come, when the king looked in with flashing eyes and, shaking his sceptre at him, cried, "Christian Elias Drosselmeyer, cure the princess, or thou must die." Drosselmeyer began to weep bitterly, but the Princess Pirlipat lay as happy as the day and cracked nuts. Pirlipat's uncommon appetite for nuts now occurred for the first time to the mechanist, and the fact likewise that she had come into the world with teeth. In truth, immediately after her transformation she had screamed continually until a nut accidentally came in her way, which she immediately put into her mouth, cracked it, ate the kernel, and then became quite composed. Since that time her nurses found that nothing pleased her so well as to be supplied with nuts. Oh, sacred instinct of nature, external, inexplicable sympathy of existence, cried Christian Elias Drosselmeyer. Thou pointest me to the gates of this mystery. I will knock and they will open. He begged straightway for permission to speak with the royal astronomer, and was led to his apartment under a strong guard. They embraced with many tears, for they had been once friends, then retired into a private cabinet and examined a great many books, which treated of instinct, of sympathies and antipathies and other mysterious things. Night came on, the astronomer looked at the stars, and with the aid of Drosselmeyer, who had great skill in such matters, set up the horoscope of Princess Pirlipat. It was a great deal of trouble, for the lines grew all the while more and more intricate. But at last, what joy! At last it became clear that the Princess Pirlipat, in order to be freed from the magic which had deformed her, and to regain her beauty, had nothing to do but to eat the kernel of the Nutcracker. Now the Nutcracker had such a hard shell that an 8 and 40-pounder might be wheeled over it without breaking it. This hard nut must be cracked with the teeth before the princess by a man who had never been shaved and had never worn boots. The young man must then hand her the kernel with closed eyes, and must not open them again until he had marched 7 steps backwards, without stumbling. Drosselmeyer and the astronomer had laboured together without cessation for 3 days and nights, and the king was seated at dinner on Sunday afternoon, when the mechanist, who was to have been beheaded early Monday morning, rushed in with joy and transport, and proclaimed that he had found out a method of restoring to the Princess Pirlipat her lost beauty. The king embraced him with great kindness, and promised him a diamond sword, 4 orders of honour, and 2 new Sunday suits. Immediately after dinner we will go to work, he added, and see to it, dear mechanist, that the unshorn young man in shoes is ready at hand with the Nutcracker, and take care that he drinks no wine beforehand, for fear he should stumble as he goes the 7 steps backward, like a crab. Afterward he may drink like a fish. Drosselmeyer was very much discomposed at these words, and after much stuttering and stammering, said that the method was discovered indeed, but that the Nutcracker and the young man to crack it were yet to be sought after, and that it was quite doubtful whether nut or Nutcracker would ever be found. The king in great anger swung his sceptre about his proud head, and roared with the voice of a lion, "Then off goes thy head." It was very fortunate for the unhappy Drosselmeyer that the king's dinner had been cooked better than usual this day, so that he was in pleasant humour and disposed to listen to reason, while the good queen, who was moved by the hard fate of the mechanics, used her influence to soothe him. Drosselmeyer then after a while took courage and represented to the monarch that he had performed his task in discovering the means to restore the princess to her beauty, and thus by the terms of the royal decree had secured his safety. The king said that was all trash, super stuff and nonsense, but resolved at last that the watchmaker should leave the court instantly, accompanied by the royal astronomer, and never return without the Nutcracker in his pocket. By the intercession of the queen, he consented that the Nutcracker might be summoned by a notice in all the home and foreign newspapers and journals. Here the councillor broke off again and promised to narrate the rest the following evening. This is now Chapter 9, conclusion of the story of the Hard Nut. The next evening, as soon as the candles were lighted, Godfather Drosselmeyer appeared and continued his story as follows. Drosselmeyer and the astronomer had been 15 years on their journey without seeing the least signs of the Nutcracker. It would take me a month, children, to tell you where they went and what strange thing happened to them. I must pass them over and commence where Drosselmeyer sank at last into despondency and felt a great desire to see his dear native city, Nuremberg. This desire came upon him all at once, as he was smoking a pipe of tobacco with his friend in the middle of a great wood in Asia. "Oh, sweet city," he cried, "sweet native city, sweet Nuremberg. He who has never seen thee, thou, he may have travelled to London, Paris, Rome, if his heart is not dead to emotion, must continually desire to visit thee, oh, Nuremberg, sweet city, where there are so many beautiful houses with windows." As Drosselmeyer grieved in such a sorrowful manner, the astronomer was moved with sympathy and began to cry and howl so pitifully that it was heard far and wide through Asia. He soon composed himself again, wiped the tears out of his eyes, and said, "But why, my respected colleague, why sit here and howl? Why should we not go to Nuremberg? Is it not all the same, wherever we seek after this miserable Nutcracker? "That is true," replied Drosselmeyer, greatly consoled. Both arose, knocked out their pipes, and went straight forward out of the wood in the middle of Asia, right to Nuremberg. They had scarcely arrived there when Drosselmeyer ran to his brother, Christopher Drosselmeyer, puppet maker, varnisher, and gilder, whom he had not seen for these many years. The watchmaker told him the whole story of the Princess Parlibat, the Lady Mouserings, and the Nutcracker, so that he struck his hands together over and over again with astonishment and exclaimed, "Aye, aye, brother, brother, what strange things are those?" Drosselmeyer then related the story of his travels, how he had passed 2 years with King Date, how coldly he had been received by Prince Almond, and how he had sought information to no purpose of the natural society in Squirrelberg. In short, how his search everywhere had been in vain to find even the least signs of the Nutcracker. During this account, Christopher Scaurus had often snapped his fingers, turned about on one foot, winked, laughed, clucked with his tongue, and then called out, "Hi, hem, he-o," if he should. At last he tossed his hat and wig up in the air, clasped his brother round the neck, and cried, "Brother, brother, you are safe. Safe, I say, for I must be wonderfully mistaken if I have not that the Nutcracker at this very moment in my possession." He then drew a little box from his pocket and took out of it a gilded nut of moderate size. "See," he said, "this nut fell into my hands in this way. Many years ago a stranger came here at Christmas time with a sack full of nuts which he offered for sale cheap. Just as he passed my shop, he got into a quarrel with a nut setter of the city, who did not like to see a stranger come hither to undersell him, and for this reason attacked him. The man put down his sack upon the ground, the better to defend himself, and at the same moment a heavily laden wagon passed directly over it. All the nuts were cracked in pieces except this one, which the stranger with a singular smile offered me, for a bright dollar of the year 1720. I thought that strange, but as I found in my pocket just such a dollar as the man wanted, I brought the nut and gilded it over, without exactly knowing why I bought the nut so dear, or why I set so much store by it." All doubt whether this nut was actually the long-sought nut, Cracker-Tuck, was instantly removed when the astronomer was called, who carefully scraped off the gold and found upon the rind of the word Cracker-Tuck engraved in Chinese characters. The joy of the travellers was beyond bounds, and the happiest man under the sun, for Drosselmeyer assured him that his fortune was made, since he would have a considerable pension for the rest of his days, and then there was the gold which had been scraped off. He might keep that for guiding. The mechanist and the astronomer had both put on their nightcaps and were getting into bed as the latter commenced. "My worthy colleague, good fortune never comes single. Take my word for it, we have found not only the nut Cracker-Tuck, but also the young man who is to crack it, and hand the kernel to the princess. I mean nobody else than your brother's son. I cannot sleep, no, this very night. I must cast the youth's horoscope." With these words, he threw the nightcap up his head, and began straightway to take an observation. The brother's son was in truth a handsome, well-grown young man, who had never been shaved, and who had never worn boots. In his early youth he had on Christmas nights gone around as a merry andrew, but this could not be seen in his behaviour in the least, so well had his manners been formed by his father's care. On Christmas days he wore a handsome red coat trimmed with gold, a sword, a hat under his arm, and a curling wig. In this fine dress he would stand in his father's shop, and out of a gallantry crack nuts for the young girls, for which reason he was called the handsome Nutcracker. On the following morning the astronomer was in raptures. He fell upon the mechanist's neck and cried, "It is he, we have him, he is found, but there are two things, worthy colleague, which we must see to. In the first place, we must braid for your excellent nephew a stout wooden cue, which shall be joined in such a way to his lower jaw that it can move it with great force. In the next place, when we arrive at the king's palace, we must let no one know that we have brought the young man with us who is to crack the nut Cracker-Tuck. It is best that he should not be found for a long time. I read in his horoscope that after many young men have broken their teeth, to no purpose, the king will promise to him who cracks the nut and restores to the princess her lost beauty, the princess herself, and the succession to the throne as a reward." His brother, the puppet maker, was highly delighted to think that his son might marry the Princess Parlipup and become a prince and king, and he gave him up entirely into the hands of the two travellers. The cue which Drosselmeyer fastened up his young and hopeful nephew answered admirably, so that he made a series of the most successful experiments even upon the hardest peach stones. As Drosselmeyer and the astronomer had sent immediate information to the palace of the discovery of the nut Cracker-Tuck, suitable notices had been published, and when the travellers arrived, Many handsome young men, and among them some handsome princes had appeared, who, trusting to their sound teeth, were ready to undertake the disenchantment of the princess. The travellers were not a little terrified when they beheld the princess again. Her little body, with its tiny hands and feet, was hardly able to carry her great misshapen head, and the ugliness of her face was increased by a cotton-white beard, which had spread itself around her mouth and over her chin. All happened as the astronomer had read in the horoscope. One youth in shoes, and after another bit upon the Nutcracker until its teeth and jaws were sore, and as he was led away, half swooning by the physician in attendance, sighed out, "That was a hard nut." When the king, in the anguish of his heart, had promised his daughter and his kingdom to him who should effect the disenchantment, the handsome young Drosselmeyer stepped forward and begged for permission to begin the experiment. And no one had pleased the fancy of Princess Pirlipat as well as young Drosselmeyer. She laid her little hand upon her heart and sighed deeply. "Ah, if this might be the one who is to crack the Nutcracker and become my husband." After young Drosselmeyer had gracefully saluted the king and queen, and then the Princess Pirlipat had received the Nutcracker from the hands of the master of ceremonies, put it without hesitation between his teeth, pulled his cue very hard, and crack, crack, the shell broke into many pieces. He then nicely removed the little threads and broken bits of shell that hung to the kernel, and reached it with a low bow to the princess, after which he shut his eyes and began to walk backwards. The princess straightway swallowed the kernel, and behold, her ugly shape was gone, and in its place appeared a most beautiful figure, with a face of roses and lilies, delicate white and red, eyes of livin, sparkling azure, and locks curling in bright golden ringlets. Drums and trumpets mingled their sounds with the loud rejoicing of the people. The king and his whole court danced, as at Pirlipat's birth. Upon one leg the queen had to be carefully tended with cologne water, because she had fallen into a swoon from delight and rapture. Young Drosselmeyer, who had still his 7 steps to perform, was a good deal discomposed by the tumult, but he kept firm, and was just stretching back his right foot for the 7th step, when Lady Mousering rose squeaking and squealing out of the floor. Down came his foot upon her head, and he stumbled so that he hardly kept himself from falling. Alas, what a hard fate! As quick as thought, the youth was changed to the former figure of the princess. His body became shriveled up and was hardly able to support his great misshapen head. His eyes turned green and staring, and his mouth was stretched from ear to ear. Instead of his queue, a narrow wooden cloak hung down upon his back, with which he moved his lower jaw. The watchmaker and astronomer were benumbed with terror and affright, while Lady Mouserings rolled bleeding and kicking upon the floor. Her malice did not go unpunished, for young Drosselmeyer had trodden upon her neck so heavily with the sharp heel of his shoe that she could not survive. When Lady Mouserings lay in her last agonies, she squealed and whimpered in a piteous tone, "Oh, Crack-a-Tuck, hard nut, hi, hi, of thee I now must die. Q, sun with 7 crowns will bite, Nutcracker at night. Hi, hi, Q, and revenge his mother's death. Short breath, must I, hi, die, so young. Q, oh, agony, queek." With this cry, Lady Mouserings died, and the royal oven heater carried out her body, As for young Drosselmeyer, no one troubled himself any further about him, but the princess put the king in mind of his promise, and he commanded that they should bring the young hero before him. But when the unfortunate youth approached, the princess held both hands before her face and cried, "Away, away with the ugly Nutcracker." The court-martial immediately took him by the shoulders and pushed him out of the doors. The king was full of anger, because they had wished to give him a Nutcracker for a son-in-law, and he put all the blame upon the mechanist and astronomer, and banished them forever from the kingdom. This did not stand in the horoscope which the astronomer had set up at Nuremberg, but he died, not allowing himself to be discouraged. He straightway took another observation and declared that he could read in the stars that young Drosselmeyer would conduct himself so well in his new station that in spite of his deformity he would yet become a prince and a king, and that his former beauty would return as soon as the son of Lady Mouserings, who had been born with 7 heads after her death of her 7 sons, had fallen by his hand, and a maiden had loved him, notwithstanding his ugly shape. And they say that young Drosselmeyer has actually been seen about Christmas time in his father's shop at Nuremberg as a Nutcracker. It is true, but at the same time as a prince. This, children, is the story of the hard nut, and you now know why people say so often, "That was a hard nut," and whence it comes that nutcrackers are so ugly. The councillor thus concluded his narration. Maria thought that the Princess Parleypap was an unnatured, ungrateful thing, and Fred declared that if Nutcracker were anything of a man, he would not be long settling matters with the Mousekin, and would get his old shape again very soon. So that was Chapter 9 of the Nutcracker. I'm now going to read Chapter 10. Chapter 10 is The Uncle and Nephew. If any one of my good readers have ever had the misfortune to cut himself with glass, he knows how it hurts and how long a time it takes to heal. Whenever Maria tried to get up, she felt very dizzy, and so it continued for a whole week, during which time she was obliged to remain in bed. But at last she became entirely well and could play about the chamber as merrily as ever. Everything in the glass case looked prettily, for the trees, flowers, and houses and beautiful puppets stood there as new and bright as ever. But best of all, Maria found her dear Nutcracker again. He stood on the second shelf and smiled upon her with a good sound set of teeth. In the midst of all the pleasure which she felt in gazing at her favourite, a pang went through her heart when she thought that good Father Drosselmeyer's story had been nothing else but the history of the Nutcracker, and of his quarrel with Lady Mouserings and her son. She knew well enough that a Nutcracker could be none other than the young Drosselmeyer of Nuremberg, Godfather Drosselmeyer's agreeable, but now alas, enchanted nephew, for that the skilful watchmaker at the court of Parleypap's father was the councillor Drosselmeyer himself. She did not doubt for any instant, even while he was telling the story. "But why was it that your uncle did not help you? Why did he not help you?" complained Maria, as it became clearer and clearer to her mind that in that battle which she saw, Nutcracker's crown and kingdom were at stake. Were not all the other puppets subject to him, and is it not plain that the prophecy of the astronomer has been fulfilled, and that young Drosselmeyer is prince and king of the puppets? Whilst shrewd Maria explained and arranged all this so well in her mind, she believed since she had seen Nutcracker and his vassals in life and motion, that they actually did live and move. But that was not so. Everything in the glass case remained stiff and lifeless, yet Maria, far from giving up her conviction, cast all the blame upon the magic of Lady Mouserings and her seven-headed son. But if you are not able to move or to talk or to me, dear Master Drosselmeyer, she said aloud to the Nutcracker, yet I know well enough that you understand me and know what a good friend I am to you. You may depend upon my help, and I will beg of your uncle to bring his skill to your assistance whenever you have need of it. Nutcracker remained still and motionless, but it seemed to Maria as if a gentle sigh was breathed in the glass case, so that the panes trembled scarce audibly indeed, but with a strange sweet tone and a voice sprang out like a little bell. Maria mine, I'll be thine, and thou mine, Maria mine. Maria felt in the cold shuddering that crept over her a singular pleasure. Twilight had come on. The doctor, with Godfather Drosselmeyer, entered the sitting room, and it was not long before Louise had arranged the tea table, and all sat around, talking cheerfully of various things. Maria had very quietly taken from her little armchair and seated herself close at Godfather Drosselmeyer's feet. During a moment when they were all silent, she looked up with her large blue eyes in the counsellor's face and said, I know, dear Godfather Drosselmeyer, that my Nutcracker is your nephew, the young Drosselmeyer of Nuremberg, and he has become a prince, or a king rather, as your companion, the astronomer, foretold. All has turned out exactly so. You now know that he is at war with the son of Lady Mouserings, with the hateful Mouse King. Why do you not help him? Maria then related the whole course of the battle, just as she had seen it, and was often interrupted by the loud laughter of her mother and Louise. Fred and Drosselmeyer only remained serious. Where does the child get all this strange stuff in her head? Said the doctor. She has a lively imagination, replied the mother. In fact, they are nothing but dreams caused by her violent fever. That story is not true, said Fred. My red hussars are not such cowards as that. If I thought so, swords and daggers, I would make a stir among them. But Godfather Drosselmeyer, with a strange smile, took little Maria upon his lap and said in a softer tone than he was ever heard speak in before, Ah, dear Maria, more power is given to thee than to me, or to the rest of us. Thou, like Parlipat, art a princess born, for thou dost reign in a bright and beautiful kingdom. But thou hast much to suffer, if thou wouldn't take the part of the poor misshapen Nutcracker, for the Mouse King watches for him at every hole and corner. I cannot thou alone, can't rescue him. Be firm and true. Neither Maria nor anyone else knew that Drosselmeyer meant by these words, and they appeared so singular to Dr. Staubaum that he felt the counsellor's pulse and said, Worthy friend, you have some violent congestion about the head. I will prescribe something for you. But the mother shook her head thoughtfully and spoke, I feel what it is that the counsellor means, but I cannot express it in words. So that was chapter 10. I'm going to read chapter 11. We might finish the book in this one sitting, hopefully. So chapter 11 is The Victory. Not long after, Maria was awaked one moonlit night by a strange rattling that seemed to come out of a corner of the chamber. It sounded as if little stones were thrown and rolled about, and every now and then there was a terrible squeaking and squealing. Ah, the mice! The mice are coming again, exclaimed Maria, in a fright, and she was about to wake her mother. but her voice failed her, and she could stir neither hand nor foot, for she saw the Mouse King work his way out of the hole in the wall, then run with sparkling eyes and crowns around and around the chamber, when at last, with a desperate leap, he sprang upon the little table that stood close by her bed. Hi, hi, hi. Must give me thy sugar plums, thy gingerbread, little thing, or I will bite thy nutcracker, thy nutcracker. So squeaked the Mouse King and snapped and grated hideously with his teeth, then sprang down again and away through the hole in the wall. Maria was so distressed by the occurrence that she looked very pale in the morning, and was scarcely able to say a word. 100 times she was going to inform her mother or Louise of what had happened, or at least to tell Fred, but she thought no one will believe me, and I shall only be laughed at. This at least was very clear, that if she wished to save little Nutcracker, she must give up her sugar plums and her gingerbread. So in the evening she laid all that she had, and she had a great deal, down before the foot of the glass case. The next morning her mother said, "It is strange what brings the mice all at once into the sitting room. See, poor Maria, they have eaten up all your gingerbread." And so it was. The ravenous Mouse King had not found the sugar plums exactly to his taste, but he had gnawed them with his sharp teeth so that they had to be thrown away. Maria did not grieve about her cake and sugar plums, for she was greatly delighted to think that she had saved little Nutcracker. But what was her terror, when the very next night she heard a squeaking and squealing close to her ear. Ah, the Mouse King was there again, and his eyes sparkled more dreadfully, and he whistled and squeaked much louder than before. "Must give me thy sugar puppets, chocolate figures, little things, or I will bite thy nutcracker, thy nutcracker." And with this the terrible Mouse King sprang down and ran away again. Maria was very sad. She went the next morning to the glass case and gazed with the most sorrowful looks at her sugar and chocolate figures, and her grief was reasonable, for thou canst not imagine, my attentive reader, what beautiful figures of sugar and chocolate little Maria Staumann possessed. A pretty shepherd and shepherdess watched a whole flock of milk-white lambs while a little dog frisked about them. Next came 2 letter carriers with letters in their hands, and then 4 neat pairs of nicely dressed boys and girls with gay ribbons rocked at seesaw upon as many boards, white and smooth as marble. Behind some dancers stood Farmer Caraway and the Maid of Orleans. These Maria did not care so much about, but close in a corner stood her darling little red-cheeked baby, and now the tears came into her eyes. "Ah, dear Master Drosselmeyer," she said, turning to Nutcracker, "there is nothing that I will not do to save you, but this is very hard." Nutcracker looked all the while so sorrowfully that Maria, who felt as if she saw the Mouse King open his 7 mouths to devour the unhappy youth, resolved to sacrifice them all. So at evening she placed all her sugar figures down at the foot of the glass case, just as she had done before with her sugar plums and cake. She kissed the shepherd and the shepherdess and the lambs, and the last took her darling, the little red-cheeked baby, out of the corner and placed it down behind all the rest. Farmer Caraway and the Maid of Orleans must stand in the first row. "Well, that is too bad," said her mother the next morning. "A mouse must have got into the glass case, for all poor Maria's sugar figures are not gnawed and bitten in pieces." Maria could not keep from shedding tears, but she soon smiled again and said to herself, "That is nothing, if Nutcracker is only saved." In the evening her mother told the counsellor the mischief which the mouse had been doing in the glass case, and said, "It is provoking that we cannot destroy this fellow that makes such havoc with Maria's sugar toys." "Ha!" cried Fred, merrily. "The baker opposite has a fine grey Secretary of Legation. Suppose I bring him over? He will soon make an end of the thing. He will have the mouse's head off, very quickly, even if it be Lady Mouserings herself, or her son, the Mouse King. And jump about the tables and chairs," said his mother, laughing, "and throw down cups and saucers, and do all kinds of mischief." "Ah, no, indeed," said Fred. "The baker's Secretary of Legation is a light, careful fellow. I wish I could walk on the roof of a house as well as he." "Let us have no cats in the night," said Louise. "Who could not bear them?" "Fred's plan is the best," said the doctor, "but we will try a trap first." "Have we got one?" "Godfather Drosselmeyer can make them best," said Fred, "for he invented them." All laughed, and when the mother said that there was no mouse trap in the house, the counsellor assured her that he had a number in his possession, and immediately sent for me. In a short time it was brought, and a very excellent mouse trap it seemed to be. The story of the hard nut now came vividly to the minds of the children. As the cook toasted the fat, Maria shook and trembled. Her head was full of the story, as it wanders, and she said to her old friend Dora, "Ah, great Queen, take care of Lady Mouserings and her family." But Fred had drawn his sword and cried, "Let them come on, let them come on, I will scatter them." But all remained still and quiet under the hearth. As the counsellor tried the fat to a fine piece of thread, and set the trap softly down by the glass case, Fred cried out, "Take care, godfather, mechanist or mousekin will play you a trick." Ah, but what a night did Maria pass! Something cold as ice trapped here and there against her arm, and crept rough and hideous upon her cheek, and squealed and squeaked in her ear. The hateful Mouse King sat upon her shoulder. He opened his 7 blood-red mouths, and grating and snapping his teeth, he squeaked and hissed in her ear, wise mouse, goes not into the house, goes not to the feast, like sugar things best, craft set, and naught will not be caught. Give all new frock, picture books all the best, or shall have no rest. I will tear and bite, Nutcracker at night. Hi, hi, Q. Maria was full of sorrow and anxiety. She looked very pale and disturbed on the following morning, when Fred told her that the mouse had not been caught, so that her mother thought that she was grieving for her sugar things, or perhaps was afraid of the mouse. "Do not grieve, dear child," she said. "We will soon get rid of him. If the trap does not answer, Fred shall bring his grey Secretary of Legation." As soon as Maria was alone in the sitting room, she stepped into the glass case and said, sobbing to Nutcracker, "Ah, my dear, good Mr. Drosselmeyer, what can I, poor unhappy maiden, do? For if I should give up all my picture books and even my new beautiful frock to the hateful mouse, he will ask for more and more, and when I have nothing left to give him, he will at last want me instead of you to bite in pieces." As little Maria grieved and sorrowed in this way, she observed a large spot of blood on Nutcracker's neck, which had been there ever since the battle. Now, after Maria had known that her Nutcracker was young Drosselmeyer, the counsellor's nephew, she did not carry him any more in her arms, nor hug and kiss him, as she used to indeed. She would very seldom move or touch him, but when she saw the spot of blood, she took him carefully from the shelf and commenced rubbing it with her pocket handkerchief. But what was her astonishment when she felt it suddenly grew warm in her hand and began to move. She put him quickly back upon the shelf again, when behold, his little mouth began to work and twist and move up and down, and at last, with a great deal of labour, he lisped out, "Ah, dearest, best Miss Stallburn, excellent friend, how shall I thank you? No picture books, no Christmas frock. Get me a sword, For the rest his speech left him, and his eyes, which had begun to express the deepest sympathy, became staring and motionless. Maria did not feel the least terror. On the contrary, she leaped for joy, for she had now found a way to rescue Nutcracker without any more painful sacrifices. But where should she obtain a sword for him? Maria at least resolved to ask advice of Fred, and in the evening, when their parents had gone out, and they sat alone together in the chamber by the glass case, she told him all that had happened to Nutcracker and Mousekin, and then begged him to furnish the little fellow up a sword. Upon no part of this narration did Fred reflect so long and so earnestly as upon the poor account which she gave him of the bravery of his hussars. He asked once more very seriously if it were so. Maria assured him of it upon her word, when Fred ran quickly to the glass case, addressed his hussars in a very moving speech, and then, as a punishment for their cowardice, cut their military badges from their caps and forbade them for a year to play the Hussars' Grand March. After this he turned again to Maria and said, "As to a sword, I can easily supply the little fellow with one. I yesterday permitted an old colonel of the cuirassiers to retire upon a pension, and consequently he has no farther use for his fine sharp sabre. The aforesaid colonel was living on the pension which Fred had allowed him, in the farthest corner of the third shelf. He was brought out, his fine silver sabre taken from him, and buckled about Nutcracker. Maria could scarcely get to sleep that night. She was so anxious and fearful. About midnight it seemed to her as if she heard a strange rustling and rattling and slashing in the sitting room. All at once it went squeak. The Mouse King, cried Maria, and sprang in her fright out of bed. All was still. But presently she heard a gentle knocking at the door, and a soft voice was heard. "Worthiest, best, kindest Miss Soulbom, open the door without fear. Good tidings." Maria knew the voice of the young Drosselmeyer, so she threw her frock about her and opened the door. Little Nutcracker stood without, with a bloody sword in his right hand and a wax taper in his left. As soon as he saw Maria, he bent down to one knee and said, "You, O lady, you alone it was that filled me with knightly courage and gave me this armed strength to contend with presumptuous foe who dared to disturb your slumber. The treacherous Mouse King is overcome. He lies bathed in his blood. Scorn not to receive the tokens of victory from a knight who will remain devoted to your service until death." With these words, Nutcracker took off the 7 crowns of the Mouse King, which he had hung upon his left arm, and reached them to Maria, who received them with great joy. Nutcracker then arose and said, "Best, kindest Miss Soulbom, you know not what beautiful things I could show you at this moment, while my enemy lies vanquished. If you could have the condescension to follow me for a few steps. Oh, will you not be so kind? Will you not be so good? Best, kindest Miss Soulbom." A few tricky words there. So that was chapter 11. Now, there are still 1, 2, 3. There's actually 3 chapters left, chapter 12, 13 and 14. So I'm going to save those for the next video. So there's 3 more chapters to go of the Nutcracker. I feel like those chapters really brought the story together, so I hope you enjoyed. Thank you so much, and I'll See you in the